Guys, this video is inspired by watching the first episode of the Book of Boba Fett. First impressions, I liked it. It felt interesting. Generally speaking, but there was a certain oomph it was missing, and it made me want to do this video because I feel like this show, I fear, will become a great example of why a lot of Disney IP to do with Star Wars and Marvel Studios, the MCUs specifically, is or will be in the future be considered too soft for its own goods. In other words, it will be something that will drive people away from their content or make them take it less seriously when they watch it, which to me will be more bad than good. Why do I say that? First off, false advertising and the consequences of that. This show was teased in its trailer, The Book of Boba Fett, as something that was akin to some kind of gangster. You're a crime lord and you're moving the way you're moving in this episode. I want to rule with respect. What? In the trailer, I this is my naive assumptions. In the trailer, the official trailer that came out for the Book of Boba Fett, they made it come across almost as if that respect thing was more like a courtesy to say, you know what, I'm not going to be as gratuitously as violent as a Jabba, as a Bib Fortuna, succeeding him. But if you F with me, if you push me to assert my power, I'm gonna do things you won't like. I'm gonna put my foot down in your mouth, and you're not gonna like it, to show you who's boss. That's what I assumed. The dinner table snippet in the trailer that, oh, what's to prevent us from killing you? I really thought it was some Godfather type thing. So far from this first episode, it's not looking that way. It's looking like a very watered down shadow of what it could be or what it's supposed to be. And the reason that makes me worry is because obviously Boba Fett is not the Mandalorian, but more importantly, and speaking of the broader scheme of Star Wars projects and MCU projects, this reminds me of the Moon Knight show that's coming up now. I believe, someone correct me if I'm wrong, the Moon Knight Disney Plus series will be the next series that Marvel Studios, the MCU, has on the streaming services. The next TV show set in that universe. There are comic runs of Moon Knight where he is viciously violent, and to me that puts him a smidge closer to a Punisher. But that's not even the reason why I reckon to compare it to Boba Fett. It may be another IP that's just too soft for its own good. The reason I worry is false advertising again. It's been teased through the trailer of Moon Knight also. Horror, stuff to do with the supernatural. At least there's been rumors of that. Now, the future stuff is more, again, rumors than stuff I can quantify. But we know from the trailer, it's gonna be definitely some stuff akin to horror. Like there was an image of like a woman who was being grabbed in the shadows, and she screamed like, "Ah!" I'm not here for any type of WandaVision BS where you appeal to the masses, the fanboys, the people who, to them, in their eyes, that counts as horror. Not to me. Shout out to WandaVision. I recognize objectively there are elements of horror in that show. It's not going to cut it, and you're going to be misleading the audience, and the consequence of that in the long term will be simple. It will be that people won't respect your creative output. and they will filter it more. And that can only last so long for fans. But speaking of fans, another big reason why Boba Fett, some upcoming Marvel projects, some projects from the past Marvel stuff, the reason I reckon it shows that some Disney IP is becoming too like soft for its own good, is because audience expectations, but more specifically, your audience is aging. Think about something. In the case of Star Wars, it's a multi-generational audience watching it. Not just in terms of like the originals, people growing up on the original trilogy, the sequel trilogy, the prequels, so on. But you also have people who are coming at it from uh, various different perspectives, being fans of Jedi more so if they're fans of stuff like the prequels, being fans of certain characters, the Han Solos with the original trilogy characters, with the Clone Wars with the Ahsoka characters, and now with this new generation of Star Wars through the sequel trilogy and the Mandalorian characters, the Kylo Rens, the Reys. They're more so, I'll argue, with the Mandalorian, but also on the Marvel side with the MCU. There's this built expectation of people who have grown up on your content expecting consistency in that content. And what's going to happen is that as people get older, there's going to be less excuse to like anything Marvel just puts in front of you. And a lot of the same people who thought your shit didn't stink. I talk about Marvel and Star Wars. A lot of people who think that the stuff is flawless will now question it more. Like, why do I like this? Again, there's always going to be easy money for families because kids will love these movies and these shows, and fanboys who accept anything Marvel and Star Wars puts in front of them. There'll always be easy money made off of those two groups of people. But yeah, the audience is growing up, and soon both Marvel and Star Wars will have that multi-generational audience. And I mean, when I say multi-generational audience, I mean people who have grown up on their projects, not necessarily people who are, in the case of Marvel, comic book fans from who are older. I'm talking about people who grow up on the MCU, people born today who grow up on MCU stuff, and then stuff that is being released in their time as they're growing. That's what I'm referring to. You have to remember diminishing returns is a very real possibility for those people. Keep that in mind because, again, I'll just reference Boba Fett and Moon Knight, the series. It's also the Blade series. I said Blade series, the Blade film that's coming. Boy, if that has any MCU quirky comedy, there's a reason Blade Trinity is not respected. It's not because that movie is super duper terrible, completely across the board. It's because it takes that soul of what Blade was and is, horror, and it feels sanitized. That arguably Blade Trinity is a early version of what the MCU is now in terms of its formula, undercutting story, emotional character scenes with some comedy. Are we still friends? Hawkeye talking to Black Widow in the airport scene, the famous airport scene in Civil War. It's like certain jokes and just nah. Not everything needs to be a quippy joke, and I feel like the audience will not tolerate that in the long term as they wise up, as they grow up. Right? It's a mental thing, but it's also a generational thing. That's another reason. It's gonna equal diminishing returns, in my opinion. Now, another reason or another thing to think about is the reputation that Marvel Studios and Star Wars has with some of their IP. I've mentioned it again. I've mentioned it before, but with the Mandalorian, that specific era of this specific era of Star Wars, with Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau, with the MCU throughout its history, it's been associated with content that services fans. No Way Home with the different Spider-Man, Hawkeye getting the Kingpin in the show from the Netflix series, The Mandalorian, and a lot of the fan service that people felt it re-energized broad interest, even more so than some would argue than the sequel films did. Again, the sequels made billions. They made billions. I said it before. These projects, these blockbusters, they will always have guaranteed bankable audiences. But if you're known to be a studio that services the fans, then you have to with certain specific projects. A Blade, a Ghost Rider. Oh, can you imagine Ghost Rider on the MCU? Flipping heck. A Ghost Rider. They've announced, as far as I'm aware, someone confirm if I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. They've announced a Werewolf by Night projects that they're doing. Some of these things with Marvel, some of these things with Star Wars, the Ahsoka series, whatever Ahsoka was in terms of her arc in Clone Wars when she was younger, or Rebels, whatever the tone and the way they characterized the characters there. In Mando season 2, she's jaded. She has been through the ringer. You can tell that from one episode. And I'm talking as a guy who's only seen one season of Clone Wars. Season 7. Actually, no. The last 4 episodes of season 7 of Clone Wars. But I know specifically from Rosario's version, there's something in her. There's like a grrr, like mentality to her. She's still stoic, very samurai Jedi-esque, but she's grown and she's sorry, that's my phone. And she's grown and you can tell she's more weathered, and that could serve for really good storytelling. Now, does that mean that all of these projects, like I said, Blade, Ghost Rider, I think they definitely need to be a certain level of mature. You can argue with Moon Knight, but it may depend on the end result. Ahsoka and Obi-Wan, they don't necessarily need to be the same levels of maturity that Blade and a Ghost Rider project or Werewolf by Night project need to be. But they do need to meet a certain fan expectation, in my opinion, that these studios have built a reputation for servicing their interests. And I think you service their interests by making sure that they're allowed to have a certain tone. I think the Ahsoka show and the Obi-Wan show needs to be serious. Why would you bring Hayden Christensen back as Darth Vader if you weren't sure that you're a studio that services fans? If you weren't sure that you were a studio talking about Star Wars and Disney, broadly speaking, that services fans in very specific ways, you need to allow the showrunners creatively to push certain limits with the tone and with the rating. You need to allow the rating to go up. When I can only switching gears a bit to Marvel, there's certain things that definitely, in my opinion, need to be mature rated stories. I mentioned Blade and Ghost Rider already. Werewolf by Night. I think there's a good case with Moon Knight too. Some of the street heroes, the Echo show, that Hawkeye show, with all due respect, they used the tracksuit mafia to undercut certain seriousness, and it was funny, and I understood it. It made sense to filter my mind through that. But again, it can only last so long. It can only feel like you're not disrespecting the audience for so long. At some point, that will ruin the reputation of Marvel if they go in the direction I think they will, based on watching this episode of Boba Fett, based on not hearing any strong news that the future Blade film with Mahershala Ali will be a mature rated film. The Dark Knight trilogy is very mature. It has very mature adult scenes. It has a certain tone, but they're all in the UK 12A, which is PG-13, the equivalent in the UK. Again, not all of these projects need to be. When I say mature, I'm just using a broad term because depending on who's watching this, I'm talking about they need to have certain adult-oriented stories that aren't necessarily just for kids. That are made for a certain mature audience. That's not me saying they need to be Game of Thrones. It will depend, obviously, from project to project. But those are my thoughts. I think it's important that Disney doesn't become, with some of this IP, too soft. And I fear it's becoming too soft for its own good. And it's going to affect the audiences and the respect for the content. Those are my thoughts. Tell me yours down below. Comment, like, subscribe, share it with your friends. Other than that, guys, I'm out. Signing off. Salute.